Okay, welcome to our 30th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. We've hit our 30s, big milestone. I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of settling down, getting a job, and all these kinds of things that we normally do in our 30s, but we've reached the 30th online seminar in this time of COVID-19. We've been running them at 2:30 in the afternoon here in the UK. That's a nice convenient time if you're in the UK. We're delighted that we've got Reio Tanji today speaking to us from Japan, where it's 10:30 p.m. at night. So thank you, Reio, for being so keen to stay up so late at night and be so focused. I suspect by 10:30 p.m. tonight, I might not be quite so sharply focused to be able to present a research talk. So I'm really pleased that you've been able to do that. So thank you for that. Reio is going to present on reference dependence and monetary incentives, evidence from Major League Baseball. We're going to follow the usual format, so if you're able to keep your microphones on mute, if you're able to access the chat room, please do feel free to add questions, comments in there. We'll let Reio talk to the end of his talk. He's got up to an hour to speak in, and then we'll have a Q&A session at that point where either I can put questions to him or you can unmute your microphones yourself. If you're unable to see the chat, drop me an email if you want to let me know about a particular question that you might have that you want to ask. Otherwise, we'll let Reio get on with his talk. So please, Reio, take away your talk.
Okay, thank you for introduction. I will share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, then let's start. Hello, everyone. I'm Reio Tanji, a doctoral course student at Osaka University. I'm glad to have a great opportunity to present my research. Today, I will talk about empirical research on reference dependence using data of baseball. Maybe baseball is popular sports in the UK, but I'll try to explain as easy to understand as possible. My research is titled Reference Dependence and Monetary Incentives, Evidence from Major League Baseball. Okay, let's move on to my contents. My research question is divided into two main ones. The first is reference dependence observed even if the observed outcome is related to monetary rewards in the real world? And the other is how does round number works as a reference point? Round numbers, those with ones places are zero, such as just 100 or just 1,000. To explore these questions with empirical analysis, I tried to employ sports economics. I used a dataset of Major League Baseball, one of the biggest league of professional baseball in America. Specifically, I explored the existence of round number reference dependence in the preferences of the professional baseball players and the mechanisms behind such observed behavior. From the empirical analysis, I found two suggestive results. First, round numbers of the performance stats, namely 0.300 of batting average, works as a reference point. However, on the other hand, there is no evidence that supports any monetary incentives to achieve their goals. We move on to the theoretical framework, literature review, and clarification of my research contribution. First, I talk about reference dependence. To interpret human behavior, Tversky and Kahneman introduced the behavioral assumption that is reference dependence. Under this assumption, agents will reference point dependent preferences consider outcomes by the relative value to of the outcomes called reference points. Suppose individuals work part-time, and now their hourly wage was changed to $15. If their former wage has been $, then they feel happy, while they feel sad if it had been 1,800, for example. Although the absolute value of $15 is constant, individuals take it as different depending on their former conditions. One of the concerns about this framework is how the value of reference point is determined. In this example, the former hourly wage, that is $12 or $18, seem to work as reference points. Literature have been discussing about this problem. Those with such reference-dependent preference have a utility function that jumps or kinks at the reference point, like these figures. In the utility function with kink, the slope changes at the reference point, like this. Usually, people take losses than benefits, so lambda is assumed to be larger than 1. On the other hand, the function with jump discontinuously rise at the reference point, rise like this. If individuals have a reference-dependent utility, what will occur as a result in the real world? Suppose that the more effort or he or she makes, the better outcome is to be obtained. This assumption fits, for example, the setting of the workplace. The worker's performance is observed as some number, such as number of the product they made. When we introduce reference-dependent utility to these settings, it may affect their production. We can write the benefit function of the individuals like this. The benefit is separated into two components: the utility from the observed number and cost to get better x. The utility depends on x and the reference point r, and the cost function is increasing and continuous in the effort level of E. For example, the utility function jumps at r. Then around the reference points, individuals get sufficiently larger benefits with almost no additional effort cost. As a result, we observe excess mass around the reference point, that is bunching, called bunching. This figure is the distribution is of the observed performance, noted x. We can see that sufficiently larger number of individuals occurs just above the reference point, and once they achieved, they stop there. Regardless of the specification of the utility function, jump of kink, this bunching will occur in the same way. If there are no additional benefits for the principals, this behavior is maybe inefficient. In this research, we apply this to the context of sports economics. And we move on to literature on sports economics. There is a lot of literature that explores athletes' reference dependence. One of the most popular one is Pope and Schweitzer, which reports professional golf players regard par of each hole as a reference point, which results in the different probability in success in their putts. Even in the competitions, the success rate of par putts is higher than that of birdie putts, since they regard bogey as loss and try to avoid it. In the long run, however, they have to care about the total number of shots instead of that of each hole. That is, if they can do so, they should be more concentrated to birdie putts as well as par putts. Allen et al. Picked up an example from marathon runners. They consider the finish times of the runners as the performance stats, and found that bunching occurs in the distribution of the stats. Runners try to go just before the round number 3 hours and 59 minutes instead of just 4 hours. So this paper suggests that round numbers can work as the reference points of the runners. We move on to another paper that relates to baseball. Pope and Simonsohn used the data of baseball called MLB and reports that players are reference dependent about their performance stats, namely batting average. Batting average is calculated by dividing the number of base hits by the number of at-bats. In baseball, batters appear to the plate about 3 to 5 times per game and try to get a base hit like crickets. So, in short, you can think that batting average is a rate of success. The figure is a distribution of the batting average of each season, quoted from their paper. The solid line indicates those at the end of the season, while gray one is the distribution when the last 5 plate appearances in each season. That is, when it is about to the end of the season. You can see that there is an excess mass around 0.3 300 at each end of the season, while no bunching occurs just before the end, like this gray line. In summary, the players consider 0.300 one of the reference numbers, one of the run numbers as their reference point and try to meet their batting average with this number. This number is also well-known benchmarks to evaluate players' batting ability. So, as the example of marathon, they conclude that players have run number reference-dependent utility. Now, we discuss their conclusion and set my research question. The case of MLB is different from that of marathon in that players are professional and receive salary or monetary rewards, more alike to real-world workplace. Although there exists bunching, we cannot conclude this is because of the players' reference dependence. If the players get additional monetary bonus when they reach their goals, 0.300, the bunching can be interpreted as interpreted by the classical economic theory. That is, they set the target value in 0.300 or other round numbers simply because it is a threshold to get additional monetary bonus. The salary scheme is in their batting average. It might jump or kink at round numbers such as 0.300. Based on this, I test if there exists any monetary incentives for the players to adjust their effort level or manipulate their stats if the observed bunching is actually caused by the player's reference dependence. Okay, now we move on to the identification strategy. As I mentioned above, I used the example of professional baseball. First, I identify bunching around round numbers or performance stats. This procedure is same as Pope and Simonsohn, but as well as batting average, I use other batting stats, which include some count stats like the number of base hits or home runs. I describe some difference of rate stats like batting average and count stats later. After that, I test if there are any specifically whether their salary discontinuously jump or kinks at the possible reference points. Graphically, we explore the mechanisms of observed bunching around the round numbers, testing the two possible explanations. It's a possibility of monetary monetary incentive hypothesis is rejected, then I suppose the player's reference dependence hypothesis. In the first step, I employ Maclaurin's manipulation test, which identifies bunching at a certain cutoff value. This method is used in regression discontinuity design to see if the running variable is manipulated. Well, it is not used in Pope and Simonsohn. I can see more detail by examining the continuity of the distribution. Using this, I test if round numbers such as 0.300 of batting averages or 20, just 20 of home runs work as a target value of the players. In this step, we don't discuss the behind mechanisms. So in this specification, the running variable is the value of the batting averages or the number of home runs. Then in the second step, I test the monetary incentives using the local regression. For player I at season T, W stands a logarithm of salary in the next year. In the case of batting averages, ABZ is the average, the value of batting average, and above is a dummy for whether the stats is above or below the possible reference points, such as 0.300. The interaction term is also included. The parameters of interest are beta 2 and beta 3, which corresponds to jump and kink of the salary scheme as a reference point, respectively. If beta 2 country positive or beta 3 is negative, then there are some monetary incentives for the players to make effort to the round numbers. And so we cannot conclude that players themselves are reference dependent. In each regression, we restrict the sample around the cutoffs. The window sizes are set ad hoc. So I tried wider or narrower ones as a robustness check. Also, I applied the method of regression discontinuity or polynomial approximation to check the jump at the round numbers. Before showing the results, I shortly summarize my research of the dataset. I need the data of the player's stats in each season and the annual salary. The stats are from Fanglass, one of the biggest private websites of Major League Baseball. The site is run by people who are familiar with quantitative sports analysis called sabermetrics. And the stats they invented are often used to empirically analyzing baseball. The dataset includes about 18,000 players by seasons. The period is 1957 to 2017. We could go back even further, but I stopped at 1957, the year when the regulation of minimum qualified number of plate appearances in place to fairly evaluate rate stats. About the rate stats, we restrict the sample to those with plate appearances larger than 200. This sample size is quite larger than Pope and Simonsohn and an up-to-date one. This is summary statistics of each stats. ABZ and OBP, batting average and on-base percentage, respectively, both of which are rate stats. They are similar, but sabermetrics says on-base percentage is more reliable stats to evaluate batters in the viewpoint of the contribution to the teams winning more games. The rest of the stats, except for age, the number of home runs batted in, stolen bases, and the base hits. About batting average, for example, the third quantile is still less than 0.300. So this round number seems to be considered by a few number of talented players. In the second step, salary data are obtained from USA Today and baseball references. The data period is from 1987 to 2017 because of lack of data availability. I matched this by the name, team, and season of the players and made a data set of players' batting stats and his salary next season. So strictly, the salary data contains data until 2018. The number of observation is about 9,000. If they get a plural year contract, use the average amount calculated by dividing the total salary by the contract year. To check the robustness, I also show the results of restricting the sample to the free agent players who signs a new contract in each period. Now we move on to the result. First, bunching is identified. The table shows the results of McCrary's manipulation test at each round number of the stats while bunching was statistically observed. The first column shows the abbreviation of the stats, and the third one is the corresponding round numbers. The first three lines, batting average and on-base percentage, are rate stats, and so it goes up and down depending on the outcome of the plate appearances. On the other hand, the rest of the stats are count stats, so they are non-decreasing in plate appearances. As reported in Pope and Simonsohn, the results support the existence of bunching around 300 of batting average, for example. Furthermore, bunching was observed also in other stats, including some count ones, such as the number of home runs. Changing the bin sizes does not dramatically change the results. This is the histogram of the batting average. Graphically, you also see the bunching at 0.300 of batting average. Drawing the approximation curve, you see that the bunching is a significant one. This is the approximated frequency of on-base percentage. The size of discontinuity seems smaller than that of batting average. Statistics say that 350 might be the target values of the players. On average, on-base percentage take larger values than batting averages by about 0.50 or 70 points, and they are calculated by the similar procedure. Roughly speaking, the difference by two stats is that on-base percentage evaluates based on balls and hit by pitch, which contribute to create more scores to the team as well as base hits. Therefore, it may be resulted from the consideration about the batting average of 0.300. This is that of home runs. As well as on-base percentage, the size of discontinuity seems less in size, But in the count stats, bunching was also observed as round numbers. As well as 300 of batting average, 20 of home run is only reached by less than 25% of the whole players, with those attending some games. This is the summary of results. As a whole, players seem to set some target values of their performance stats and just manipulate them to meet their goals. The target values may be the round numbers. Then we move on to the second step. The polynomial approximation applying the method of RDD to check the jump in the salary scheme. To check the robustness, I add other controls and tried different bandwidths of approximation following the method of regression discontinuity design. The rightmost column shows the z value, and the p stars. Interestingly, the results don't seem to support any monetary incentives. The estimated jump in each possible reference points are insignificant or even negatively significant in the base hits. Including other controls does not change the results. This is a result of linear regression of the batting average, including the interaction term to check the kink at the round numbers. Estimates of third and fourth lines correspond to the jump and kink as the 300 of batting average. Again, both coefficients insignificant and point estimates are close to 0. Even though players are eager to reach 300 of batting average, the achievement is not reflected in the salary of the next year. The other stats show the same tendency. This is a result of home runs. Again, the coefficient related to monetary incentives are statistically insignificant, and the estimates close to 0. This is a result of the same regression that restricts the free agent players. In the first 3 columns, weakly support the jump and kink, but including more controls and fixed effect in turn to insignificant. After controlling the number of plate appearances, batting average is no more considered. Of course, whether to enter each game and appears to the plate depends on his performance, and if the player achieves to reach 300 does not seem to be matter. Now, one important problem of this identification is endogeneity. As described in the previous sections, this method is like RDD, regression discontinuity design. However, the running variable, for example, batting average, is likely to be manipulated. Pope and Simonsohn pointed out that players manipulate their batting average by missing last plate appearances and games near the end of the seasons. Suppose it is about to end of the season and 2 players with their batting average just 300. Here comes the last plate appearances, specifically the chance to get a base hit. Player A intentionally avoid these plate appearances by being replaced by the reserved batter, while B did not. As a result, player B couldn't get a base hit. Then the batting average of the player A stays in 300, but that of player B fails to keep it. Suppose we assume that the probability of getting base hit is equal to the batting average, or about 30%. Then we can predict that also player A could not get a base hit as at a probability of 70%. If the team managers monitor these actions to manipulate their rates and consider player A cheatingly meet with their goals, they may not give monetary rewards to such players, even though there in fact exist monetary incentives. In summary, the estimated jump as the run numbers might be underestimated. To deal with this problem, we conduct another regression. Using the sample after the 2002 season, we make a data set of the batting stats on September 28th in each season. MLB regular seasons usually end in September, so most of the teams leave only a few games at September 28th. That is, the final standings of their teams are almost confirmed, and it is a good chance for the players to manipulate their stats. In other words, stats are not manipulated until the last 2 or 3 games, and the managers are likely to consider the salary next season according to the stats around them, September 28th. In fact, using this dataset, the observed bunching disappeared, as you see this in figure. Using this dataset, I regress the salary again. This table is a result. Again, the quotient that relates to the jump and kink at the 300 of batting average is insignificant. And the point estimates are far from what the monetary incentive hypothesis expected. Moreover, I tried another restriction on the samples to the players who cannot manipulate their stats, as well as other team sports like football. The objective of the teams is to win more games, not getting better stats of one individual. In Major League Baseball, after the regular season, the playoffs will be held by some of the better performing teams to compete for the World Championship. If the team is in intense competition with another teams for the division championship or qualification of the playoffs, the players cannot have a chance to manipulate because they have to set their priority to win the game first. Thus, they cannot avoid the plate appearance to manipulate the batting average. Specifically, I restrict the sample to the players that satisfy at least one of the following these conditions. The first one is that teams finished their season within 1 game competing the championship of their division or to win the playoffs, including those who made the 163rd matches. These teams may lose or get the qualification of the playoffs according to the results of the last game of the regular stats. Also, I add the teams that cannot allow players to manipulate it. The second condition is teams that play only 161 or less games. Each teams play 162 games in each season, but after the final standings are fixed, their last game was can be unexpectedly cancelled because of weather condition or some other reasons. These players may have planned to manipulate at the last game, but could not of the cancellation. Finally, the third is players in 1994, the year when the strike by the Players Association unexpectedly ended the season. The strike occurred due to the conflicts of in labor management negotiations. Using McRae's test again, we can confirm that there is statistically insignificant discontinuity at 300 of batting average. This is a result of regression of salary. Again, we can confirm that there is statistically insignificant discontinuity at 300 of batting average. In summary, even though there are observed bunching around round numbers, there is no suggestive evidence that supports the existence of monetary incentives. Players are likely to be concerned with the round numbers for other motivation than any monetary incentives or reference dependence. These results are consistent with that of taxi drivers in the New York City, Crawford and Mann, 2011, suggesting that taxi drivers refer to some daily target amount of sales in considering whether to stop. In this setting, it can occur even the achievement does not any monetary rewards. Okay, then we move on to the discussion part. I discuss possible alternative interpretation and the manipulation. First, I discuss manipulation and adjustment of the effort level. The previous literature of golf and marathon, they argued that players adjust the effort level to meet with the goals. However, in my example of baseball, players seem to be manipulate their right stats to achieve it. Also, there are no monetary incentives, and so such manipulation do not provide any benefit to the players. Even so, they stick to the round numbers. This may be rather interesting result. Exploring the player's behavior, we may learn more about some motivation to encourage individuals to seemingly inefficient behavior. Also, I found bunching of the count stats like home runs, as I described in the previous sections. Count stats are harder to be manipulated because missing games or plate appearance, as I explained in the Endogeneity Problem section, does not increase the number. Moreover, there are no incentives to stop playing after reaching round numbers, since even though he failed to hit home runs, and afterwards the number of home runs does not decrease. Unlike RBI or runs batted in, some of these stats depends on the performance of his colleagues. We can say that it is another surprising result that the players may impart adjusting their effort level to achieve their internal goals. Next, I discuss some alternative interpretation. One is the piece rate contracts. My analysis include only the fixed part of the salaries in the next season. If players sign such contracts that give them additional monetary bonuses, that the achievement of round numbers may affect not on the fixed parts. So I refer the database of the player's specific contracts, named COTS baseball contracts. Although it doesn't including any econometric analysis, we can obtain sufficient information to reject this possibility. This is contents of Ichiro Suzuki, one of the most popular Japanese player in the Major League Baseball. He signed in 2004 season with Seattle Mariners. In addition to the signing bonus and fixed part of salary, it contains the performance dependent part, or piece rate rewards. However, it considers stats that is related to the attendance, like plate appearances, instead of batting averages or home runs. This is only an example, but as far as I can refer, there are no players with contracts that rewards according to the batting averages. It is natural that managers design contracts depending on the attendances, since it is regarded as a scarce resource. The number of the players in a team that achieves, for example, 50, 100 or paid appearances are well predicted, but that of 300 of the batting averages are relatively difficult. If the environment that year happens to be favorable to hitters, and the average batting average in the league is very high, the more players, large number of players can achieve 300 of batting averages, and so team managers have to pay their players a very large amount of additional compensation. What is more, the number of players who can get contract with piece rate rewards is very small, even if there are some players with monetary rewards on their batting averages. It is unlikely that it can explain the observed bunching. At last, I discuss another alternative interpretation, which remains some room for more specific research. To the contract length. Like other professional sports such as football, talented players sign the plural year contracts. And Krautmann and Oppenheimer pointed out that the longer the contract duration extend, the lower return to the performance is obtained. Using a regression of the salary of the next season on the performance stats, contract length, and interaction time. Using salary data of Major League Baseball, the coefficient of the interaction time, so beta 3, is significantly larger than 0, suggesting that players sign contracts with lower returns to the beta 3 is negative. So suggesting that players sign contracts with lower return to the performance stats if they offered plural year contracts. Therefore, my results can be biased downward. Also, I did not mention the reverse after the retirement. That is, more times they achieved 0.300 or batting average, the more likely they are allowed to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, for example. Further research about these rewards should be taken in the following research. Okay, now move on to the concluding remarks. Through the analysis, I found that Major League Baseball players show round number reference-dependent preferences about their performance stats, even though achieving their goals is not incentivized. Specifically, they adjust their effort levels or manipulate to meet them with some round numbers. However, there exists no monetary incentives in their contract that makes players to do so. Furthermore, bunching was observed in the count stats as well as rate stats. It is a little surprising because count stats are harder to manipulate than rate stats. The findings might have implications about how to design contracts to incentivize players, real world some agents. Batting average is one of the most important stats to evaluate players, but according to the sabermetrics, batting average is relatively less important stats to win more games compared to the stats like other useful metrics. If managers design some contrasts that make players to be interested in other stats, the teams may win more games. These results may be applied to the contract design or the workplace, where the performance can be observed by the workers. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Reio, for a really interesting talk. I have to confess, baseball is not my favorite sport, and so I'm going to be relying on the input of lots of our seminar attendees to ask you questions and provide comments. There were a few things in the chat window which you may not be able to see. Brad Humphrey another paper on bunching and marathon performances by Markle, Wu, White and Sackett in 2018. Goals as reference points in marathon running, a novel test of reference dependence in the Journal of Risk and Uncertainty. So you might want to chase that up. And Stefan Szymanski writes that point 300 might be a reference point for the batter, but it's also a reference point. Can you test for the significance of other hypothetical reference points, so 0.01, 0.02, and so on? I don't know if you have any response to Stefan's question about other reference points. Hi, Reio, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Yes.
Pramod, sorry,
yes. Like in the chat button, there are some chat. So can you respond to the chat? Kanji-san.
I'm sorry, maybe bad connection.
So
sorry.
The question specifically was related to whether there are other reference points. So Stefan Szymanski has written in the chat function a question which is that are there other reference points that you can find? You test for the significance of other reference points like 0.01 or 0.02.
Yes. Maybe because some raw numbers and we can. I'm sorry.
I think the question is whether there might be other reference points. So are other kind of roundish numbers also reference points as well?
Well, so the left hand side.
Like if I am like I think he tests for the reference point at 0.025 also, right? So he also tests the reference point at 0.025, 0.30 and 0.20, and you find that there is some kind of reference point also, right?
Yeah,
right.
I see. I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, if I could I just make
Stefan? Yep.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just make the point clear.
Yeah.
My concern is that it's when we talk about reference points, it's not just we should think of ourselves as the subjects as well. You chose 0.3 because you thought 0.3 was an interesting point. That's a reference point for you as a researcher. So how do we control for that potential bias? Well, actually, you could just choose random reference points, just choose random numbers between 0.2 and 0.3 and run 100 tests and see how many of those are significant to show that 0.3 really is a distinct reference point, not just something that is a shiny object to you, the researcher. Does that make sense?
So actually for the players, these round numbers likely to, I can say, the benchmarks to follow up their limited ability to achieve the better performance, make up or better. So I think setting these round numbers as some target values, we can design some contract to encourage players more to lead players to better performance, I think.
Okay, thanks, Reio. There are no other questions in the chat, so if anyone else wants to raise their hand and ask a question, please feel free to. Rodfort's written to Stefan's point, if the average is 0.265 as in your table, maybe that's the reference point statistically. Is 0.3 different from 0.265 in the data?
You mean like this point?
Rod, if you want to chip in, you're welcome to. Brad says that he thinks the idea is round numbers have a salience for athletes while other numbers do not. Someone that's run a half marathon, I can say that these numbers do have an arbitrary significance, that's for sure. I mean, looking at that plot, you can see that there's a spike in the distribution at 0.3. And I guess the question that Rod might be referring to, again, not being an expert on baseball, is whether 0.265 is also another one of those little lumps in the distribution.
Actually, I tried other points like 0.265, but the bunching was not statistically significant. So, and we can observe only bunching in only 300 and 250. So even though some even though these numbers like seems to be a salient spike, we cannot support bunching around these numbers.
You don't find that that's a significant bunching point then? I mean, it looks similar to the 0.3, for the naked eye.
Yeah, yes, but we couldn't find it using Macquarie's manipulation test. So
okay.
Okay.
Brad also says that there's little research on how reference points get set, and not being a baseball fan, I've no real idea why 0.3 would be significant. Rod says maybe they're saying around the average, not 0.3, since the vast majority do not achieve 0.3. There is some sort of stubbornness here.
So can I explain to him, like, なんで何か0.3はレフェレンスポイントなの？何か0.25とか0.2とかないですか？ They are saying that.
So, okay. Sorry, I figured question.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
So I think just 200 is too low value to achieve. So it's only in my opinion, but 200 cannot be work as reference point that because the players cannot figure because players think achieving only 200s does not to be rewarded by the team managers or the baseball fans, I think.
But there's certainly a little. I mean, again, there's a little spike down there. You know, there's a little. You know, the vertical bar for 0.2 is higher than 0.19, certainly on 0.198, 199, 198, and so on, and slightly above as well. I mean, presumably, if you are not very good, so you're only gonna hit down there, then you probably still do have this reference point that you want to get above, right? You want to hit enough so that you get your average above 0.2 in the same way that you would if you were in the ballpark of getting 0.03. Brad says that a batting average of 0.2 has a specific name in MLB. It's widely referred to as the Mendoza line, named for a specific player.
Can I say something?
Go on, Brad. Dennis, even sorry, go on.
So, having been a baseball fan for a very long time, so I would agree with Brad. We don't really know how these reference points are set, but ever since I was a kid, it was 300. Everybody had 300 in their mind, and I don't know why, but it was there. 200 has always been there, not as a good thing, but if you don't do that, you were ridiculed. The worst players don't get to 200. So, you know, thinking about whether there is a spike in the data at 252 or 283 or whatever, I think is a little bit like saying, well, why isn't it somewhere else? I don't know why it's not somewhere else, but we know from years and years and years of following baseball that these are the values that have always been talked about. Now, I can remember when people talked about 280 as being good, but if you hit 280, you also had to do other stuff. Whereas if you hit 300, you don't really have to talk about what the rest of the attributes were. If you hit 250, that was okay if you hit a lot of home runs, but it wasn't so good if you did not. So I think that baseball history tells us what these reference points are. How they got set where they are, I don't know, but they clearly are in the minds of the players differently than other spots where you might find a peak. At least that's my impression. Whether they're related to compensation or not, I'm really surprised that there's not evidence that hitting over 300 is trigger some sort of a incentive clause. That really does surprise me. But it's also part and parcel, I think, of the emphasis on home run hitting as much as anything. So I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Dennis. Rod says the erratic behavior is also at a couple of other places by the eyeball test. Easy to do more tests on these other numbers. Rod says in response, I think, to what Dennis was saying, it's a spike in the data that drove Reio's original inquiry, and we don't know how the reference point is formed. So how do we know which one the players choose? Reio, I don't know if you've got anything you want to initially respond to, both Rod or Dennis.
Okay. I think so that such as 2.200, the worst player, you said, and so I think some I'm thinking of possibility of that only round numbers is not the true reason for working that 300 works as a reference point, and as you say, the historical customs made the reference point, and the players stick to these values is can be possible, I think.
Okay, thanks, Reio. Stefan's been waiting patiently with his hand up. Stefan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I really responding to Dennis's point, and I think I'm not sure my original point is I'm making myself clear about this, so I just want to try and clarify. I don't disagree with what Dennis says. I think this sounds absolutely right that these reference points exist, and we know this. It's not, but if these reference points exist and we know them, then crudely, what's the point of the paper? The point of the paper is to go beyond that and to say, yes, not only are these reference points exist, which we know they exist, but that in addition, these reference points are influencing behavior. And that's what this paper is claiming to test. And that's what's really interesting about this paper, is saying, well, actually, not only do these reference points exist, they're changing the way people act. And my point is simply this, that I'm perfectly prepared to be convinced that that's true. But what I'm worried about is the idea that this statistical test is not really powerful enough to demonstrate this, and that perhaps if I just choose a random point, that might also appear statistically significant. And the way to allay that concern, it strikes me, is what we do in lots of other contexts, is to run 1,000 tests on randomly selected points in the distribution and find what percentage of those are significant. And we should expect that fewer than 5% of them are going to reach statistical significance. And that's going to be convincing evidence that these points, that the 0.3 or 0.2 really are reference points and not just, statistical, just an artifact of the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for your advice. Actually, we can say that 300 of batting average is a reference point. Considering that players seems to be avoid their final plate appearances or the chance to hit, but it is true that about home runs or other batting stats like runs batted in, we can conclude that the statistical significance at the round numbers are not sufficiently reliable one. So I can try on the random point test you said in.
Great, thanks, Reio. Dennis, do you want to say something in response?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Stefan about the point of the paper, and I think that it's an interesting one. For me, that what's interesting is not so much about the existence or non-existence of potential other reference points, but this one that we know, this place that we know has been a big deal throughout baseball history, does seem to affect their behavior. That was, I think, clear from the paper, but does not affect their pay, which I think is really a fascinating result that there's this thing that changes their behavior that has no compensation attached to it. That's what I think is most interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Stefan, your hand's still up. Did you want to say something off the back of that, or is it just still a hangover from earlier on?
Well, I was just about to write something, so maybe I can. I'll just say it if that's okay.
Yeah.
Going back to Dennis's point about the salary. This was another question I had, which is, maybe I'm wrong here, but I thought that in the regressions, just batting average on its own was insignificant, which sort of then, perhaps if batting average alone is not significant, then it's not surprising if it's not significant when interacted with the reference points. And so my question is, why not try using the variables that, say, for example, Hakes and Sauer found significant consistently, which was slugging and in more recent times on base percentage. So you didn't include slugging, I think, in any of your regressions, but slugging always works out to be very significant in these regressions, as I understand it. So why not try that, and that might work better for you.
Okay, actually, I included in some regressions and regressions with WAR wins above replacement instead of slugging averages, and try to control the true player's ability. And so I think the slugging, I should include the slugging terms as well. So yeah, I will try it.
Okay, in the chat, Jorge also mentions that he thinks that this is often referred to as path dependence, where history matters and change is difficult in behavior, even if conditions do change. Pramod, you had your hand up briefly. Was that a comment you wanted to make?
I'm sorry, like yeah, it's kind of a mistake. So I don't have any question.
Okay, and there's a couple more related points in the chat related to the discussion that Dennis and Stefan have had. Brad mentions it doesn't have to be random where you test, but you can perform the test at each point on the distribution that you've got. Brad says his former student develops convincing evidence of reference points for professional figure skaters depending on the performance of the previous skater on the ice. So that's giving some sense of how these reference points can be developed. Are there any more questions people want to ask? And Brad's given the link to his former student's dissertation as well in the chat. Any more questions? And my apologies if there's any background noise. My son got home from school and is not very happy at the moment, so you might be able to pick that up in the background. My apologies if so. Okay, well, in which case, thank you, Reio, for a really interesting talk. This provoked some very interesting discussion as well. So a really interesting session overall. Thank you for staying up so late. Must be approaching midnight for you there now. So thank you once again for that. Next week, our presenter is, from my perspective, much closer to home. We've got Mobolaji Alabi presenting next week on October the 30th, who is also at the University of Reading. He's presenting on the financial impact of financial fair play regulation, evidence from the English Premier League. But as we close up, just time to say another thank you to Reio Tanji for a really fantastic presentation, really interesting talk, and a really interesting afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions, and I wish you all a great weekend.